I'm Cameron Partridge. I am honored to be with you. I'm a member of the Task Force on the Study of Marriage. I've flown in from Boston, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm jealous. We have about 4 feet of snow, which I understand is more the norm for you all at this time, and I think that ours will melt maybe by general convention. Maybe. So, at the 77th General Convention of our church, the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music submitted a resolution calling for a task force on the study of marriage. And their resolution, which was A050, included an explanation that I think might be helpful to quote at the outset. Quote, as the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music developed liturgical resources for blessing same-sex relationships, it faced repeated questions about marriage. What makes a marriage Christian? What is the relationship between the church's blessing of a relationship, whether different sex or same sex, and a union, marriage or otherwise, created by civil law? Is the blessing of a same-sex relationship equivalent to the marriage of a different sex couple, and if so, should this liturgy be called marriage? Because the church's understanding of marriage affects so many of its members, the Commission believes it is important to engage in a church-wide conversation about our theology of marriage. So you can get a sense of the trajectory that kind of led to the formation of the committee, both coming out of questions around blessings of same-sex couples and just asking broader questions about marriage in general. So the resolution called for a task force on the study of marriage to be appointed by the presiding bishop and the president of the House of Deputies, and 12 of us were appointed to that task force. And it's really been our honor and our privilege to serve in this way over this triennium. Along the way, we've received some feedback that the membership of our group might have been more diverse in various ways, and so the second of our resolutions, which I'll speak to a little bit more later, in part responds to that feedback, and it asks for the General Convention to authorize and fund the task force to continue its study over the next triennium. That's one of 2 resolutions that we have put forward. So, now something of a description of our mandate, what basically Resolution A050 asked of us. And it was a very broad charge. We were asked to study and consult broadly on the subject of marriage, to explore historical, biblical, theological, liturgical, and canonical dimensions of marriage. A mouthful. And to do so in consideration of the changing societal and cultural norms and legal structures of our time, which are happening as we speak. We were asked to, and this is a quote, to consult with the Standing Commission on Constitution and Canons and the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music to address the pastoral need for priests to officiate at a civil marriage of a same-sex couple in states that authorize such. We were asked to hello, Siri. We were asked to consult with couples living in marriage and in other lifelong committed relationships and with single adults. We were asked to consult with other churches in the Anglican Communion and with our ecumenical partners. When we got together, we looked at, we began by really looking at the resolution to understand our charge, and we noted particularly the verbs. So consult, 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 and then we were asked to consider issues raised by changing societal and cultural norms and legal structures, including legislation authorizing or forbidding marriage, civil unions, or domestic partnerships between 2 people of the same sex in the U.S. and other countries where the Episcopal Church is located, because we're not only in the U.S. And then another verb, we were asked to develop tools for theological reflection and norms, tools for theological reflection and norms for theological discussion at a local level, and to report our progress. So, we engaged this very broad and rich charge, I would say, with prayer, We engaged it very faithfully. We engaged it with a strong sense of integrity, and I would say of vulnerability. This is a significant work and ministry and conversation that we were invited into and to share. We really, I would say, poured ourselves into this work over this triennium, and we were able to meet based on our funding. We were only able to meet twice in person, so I would echo that we heard about earlier. We wish that we could have done more, but we were very grateful to actually be granted the ability to have that second meeting, because that actually wasn't initially going to be possible. So we met twice in person as a group, in 9 web conferences online, and in numerous phone calls and emails as well. I would characterize the report as holistic, really, inspired by that sheer breadth of our charge. But by the same token, the holistic aspect of our report doesn't mean that it's completely comprehensive. It's not totally systematic. It's not like a complete systematic theology where everything fits in a very crystalline manner. It really marks, I would say, a substantial beginning to an ongoing process of reflection and prayer and practice. It takes up one that's been going before us, and it carries the baton further along the track. I would also characterize this report as a tool for discernment. I mean, and that was part of our charge. That really, I would say, emerges from a particular moment in the life of the church. The Episcopal Church, and I think the Episcopal Church as embedded in the wider Anglican communion. And I really see the work of our task force as one of several distinct but connected arenas in which our church is engaging in collective discernment right now. I don't think that what we are up to, is totally disconnected from thinking and reimagining our church structures. I think all of it's part of a larger whole, and I found it very helpful to think about. There's a particular charge to the work of this task force, but it's not disconnected, and it's a conversation that's worthwhile, and not simply a debate. You know, we may have been having debates that touch on some of the work of our task force over decades, but all of that comes out of real, live questions, real human beings, real hearts, real communities, and it's worthy and it's worthwhile, and that's why it's a vulnerable task, because it's also intense. While the charges of the two task forces are clearly pretty different and have different stakes and different potential outcomes, many differences, but I see them as connected. And I see them as connected especially through the lens of discernment. What's God calling us to, who is God calling us to be and to become? I mean, it really goes back to some of what President Jennings was saying in her talk earlier, that sense of identity, the growth into which we're called. So, having said all that, our task force, when we parsed out the language of the resolution, we named 3 working groups to try to respond to what we were asked to do. The 3 working groups were, number 1, biblical and theological dimensions of marriage. That's the one I happen to have sat on. Number 2, historical, liturgical, and canonical roots of marriage. And number 3, conversations and consultations, as well as changing norms of marriage. Those 3 working groups produced 7 essays. And so our final report, if you've had a chance to read it, it's large, but you can take it in chunks by reading the essays. The first one is a biblical and theological framework for thinking about marriage. The second is Christian marriage as vocation. The third was a history of Christian marriage. And I'll say a little bit more about each of these essays in a minute. Fourth is marriage as a rite of passage. The fifth is the marriage canon, a history and critique. The sixth is agents of the state, a question for discernment. And the seventh is changing trends and norms in marriage. The essays range, they tend to average about 20 or so pages, but they range from 5 pages maybe to about 30. They take particular angles, theological, biblical, historical, canonical, anthropological, sociological. They overlap one another in some respects, and they will self-reference when that happens. And as I've said, it's not systematic, but it is certainly connected. I would think of it as a constellation of essays that are meant to invite us into deeper reflection, prayer, and practice. You may find yourself drawn to read some essays more closely than others. You might read the whole thing, and we sincerely hope that you do, because we work very hard on it. The joke in my household was that my marriage was taxed by the marriage task force. Some very, very late nights and being away from my family. I'm not the only one. So we've observed and engaged in conversation in a variety of ways since the release of the report. We've certainly some online forums. We've seen that happening, and we've had some email and phone conversations, and we continue to encourage that engagement. The final report also includes the 2 resolutions, and it includes a toolkit. And the toolkit really is in that spirit. Boy, there's some fun happening out there. The toolkit is really is designed to be used in congregations to invite communities, local communities, or dioceses at a wider retreat into this very rich work. And there's a couple different formats. One's a 45-minute toolkit designed really for like a forum after worship or between worship services, and one is a 90-minute, which is a longer commitment. So that toolkit is really, and it asks questions that invite they're open-ended questions. They're not presuming particular answers. They're inviting you to engage with these different facets of marriage that we were charged to explore. So I really commend them to you. I hope that you will use them. We've already had some feedback on some of their use, but it's probably been used a lot more than we know. But they were really done to try to respond to the charge to create tools, but we also created them in a spirit of openness and really hoping that conversations about marriage could be done with open hearts and really engaged minds, and not in sort of debate or wedge kind of ways. We just don't find that to be a helpful way of actually progressing and engaging this. So let me turn to the resolutions. I'm worried about my time. So the first resolution called for the marriage canon to be rewritten. The rewrite would make the canon ordered more practically in terms of pastoral practice. It would focus on the actual vows made in the Book of Common Prayer, marriage rite, rather than the purposes of marriage in general, just focusing on the vows. It would reflect the theological views expressed in the report, and by using gender-neutral language, 2 persons, rather than a man and a woman, it would be responsive both to resolution, one of the resolutions that was referred to us, and to the A050 charge that the task force address the pastoral need for priests to officiate at civil marriage of a same-sex couple in states that authorize that. A couple other notes about the proposed marriage canon change, and I no doubt there will be others that will come. I mean, I don't know, but this is one that's proposed by our task force, and the legislative committee will receive whatever other resolutions may come forward, so who knows what will come out of all this. But a couple observations further on our proposed resolution. The changes are attentive as much to religious and theological differences within a given couple as they are to the genders of the couple. So, for instance, inter-religious marriage is envisioned in this. There's a kind of pastoral responsiveness to couples on the ground in our communities that is had in mind here. So it recognizes that there are some jurisdictions, for example, parts of Europe, where clergy don't solemnize marriage. The revised marriage canon explicitly states that clergy have the right to decline, not only to do particular marriages, so it's preserving that, but also to do particular blessings of civil marriages. That has not ever been recognized in the canons before, and this revision both preserves and names that more expansively. It also recognizes that in addition to the 3 rights in the BCP, there are or might be other marriage rights authorized by this church, either for trial use throughout the church or for provisional use under the direction of the local ecclesiastical authority. So not knowing what's going to come forward, but recognizing that, already in some places, so for instance, in my diocese, Massachusetts, under the generous pastoral response, we have been authorized to solemnize the marriages of same-sex couples using the liturgy of I will bless you and you will be a blessing, for instance, or in our case, an adapted BCP liturgy. There's some dioceses where that already is true. So this is recognizing that that already is true and opening to the possibility of whatever may come down the pike or whatever may not. Liturgical development was really not our charge. That's under the SCLM. The second proposed resolution that is part of our report seeks to continue the work of the task force to provide an opportunity for the church to study and possibly respond to the changing realities in society and in our congregations that really actually challenge marriage as the norm for adult relationships and what it means even to be family or household. That was one of the consistent threads of comment that we received was both to deepen our engagement with the theology of marriage on the one hand, and on the other hand, to say, well, marriage is not the only thing we should be talking about when we're talking about relationships. And can we please look at that, especially among young adults? As a college chaplain, that's something that comes to me all the time. So yes, we should be thinking about marriage, and we need to think more broadly. And how do we even understand or define the notion of family? That came up. It was just a steady drumbeat in the kinds of responses that we got. So we could only do so much in our time, and that's one of the reasons why we were seeking to continue the conversation. So, how is my time? Can I say more? I'm finished? No. I can't say more about the different content of the essays. But do I have time for a couple of questions, or not so much?
We have to finish here at 12:30, and we're already over here.
Whoop.
We've got one more presentation.
Apologies then.
You're around though for...
I'll be here. Yes, I'm here for lunch. I'm totally happy to talk with you. I would love to talk with you.